Tuesday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. It's a great day because we get a chance to talk some UGA football here today. I've got some interesting things to say about how I think that Georgia's formula for a national championship may come together in this upcoming season. We're always striving to make the show more interactive. I'm going to explain today how DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, gets even more listener and viewer input on today's program. Our buddy Connor Riley going to be with us here today, too. So we got a lot of stuff to do. Some of it fun, some of it serious, some of it maybe kind of in between on all of that. And we could not do that if you weren't here. So I'm really glad to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of my big goals on this show is always to make it as interactive as possible. I don't want this to just be me talking the entire time because, let's face it, from time to time I can be a little bit of a blowhard. You don't want just me. You want to balance that out with somebody else. And so we always want to try to make the show as interactive as we possibly can make it. Today I'm going to reintroduce something that we've done before as a way of just soliciting more input, getting more opinions shared on this show. Your opinions, the one that really matters, what you all think. We'll get a chance to do that on the show today. Before that, speaking of being kind of a blowhard, I said on yesterday's show that I believe that this upcoming season, Georgia's going to beat Alabama twice, and I also think by doing so will essentially end the career of Nick Saban. Now, admittedly, if something like this is going to happen, Georgia's got some work to do, right? Just like every other team does during the offseason. You got to have some guys step up. You've got to have some level of improvement if you want to go out and do what you haven't done yet. And not only has Georgia not gotten over that hump, no former Saban assistant's ever beaten Nick Saban. We have now kind of covered that ground over and over and over again. So with that in mind, I want to be fair and balanced about something here for a moment. I think if Georgia's going to really fulfill the prediction that I made for them yesterday, if they're going to really beat Alabama in September in the regular season clash that everyone's waiting for, and if the Crimson Tide then goes on to win the SEC West, and then Georgia beats them again in Alabama for the SEC championship, if Georgia's going to be that good, national championship level good, then I think there are 5 players for Georgia who need to step up for this upcoming season. I'll kind of rattle through the 5, and then I'll kind of talk about each of them individually. The 5 for me: quarterback Jamie Newman, safety Richard Lacount, wide receiver George Pickens, running back Zamir White, and then another name that I'll get to here before we're done on the program here today. But those are going to be my 5. Those are the 5 that you got to have step up. And speaking of a couple of these names, I think it's interesting that 2 of them show up. I'm a big fan of Athlon Sports. Y'all know, at least a lot of you who've been with us for a long time. I like the Preseason college football magazines. I like these media entities that have been covering the sport for a long time. Athlon's one of those. And they also do some off-season content this time of year as well. They have Stephen Lassen, the writer on this, the top 50 players in the sport for the preseason. And shout out to Athlon Sports for not doing this as, like, say, a 50-part slideshow or one of these things they release like once a week for the next 50 weeks. They just got the whole 50 up right now. You can go read the whole thing. I'll put a link to this when we post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com later on today. We'll probably have Steven on at some point in time to talk about this. It's a pretty good piece. There are 2 Georgia names that show up, and it just so happens that the 2 Georgia names that show up in this top 50 are also 2 of the 5 that I think that really need to step up for the Dogs to win the national championship. Let me start with quarterback Jamie Newman, who comes in on Athlon's list at number 39. And what Stephen Lassen for Athlon says about Newman is that he's one of the toughest players to rank going into 2020. We kind of understand that how that could be true. If you look back at his Wake Forest career, he had some good moments. He had some moments that maybe left a little something to be desired. Hard to know how he fits into the Georgia plan, and Lassen also mentions that. He says that he's capable of finishing 2020 as the top quarterback in the SEC, but he's also going to have to navigate being a new play caller. He means Todd Monken, a new scheme, a rebuilt offensive line, and a thin group of proven playmakers on the outside. More on that in a moment. You obviously would agree that Georgia, when it comes to its offensive weapons, what it's putting around Jamie Newman, there is plenty of potential but not a lot in the way of proven commodities. That's probably true. However, here's one piece of good news when it comes to Newman. To the extent that you care about other people's opinion, to the extent that you care about the Athlon preseason top 50, did you know that Jamie Newman is the only SEC quarterback to make this list? Even the vaunted Kyle Trask, who've been told so many good things about and so many high expectations exist for, even he doesn't make the list of top 50. In fact, he didn't even make the list of also receiving votes. So Newman, difficult to predict how good he's going to be. The ultimate truth about him, probably somewhere in the middle of the two wide-ranging hot takes that sort of exist about him as a former Wake Forest quarterback stepping into a big role at Georgia. But kind of nice to know that he is, for now, the only SEC quarterback on this list. Also coming in on Athlon's list of the top 50 players in college football for preseason is Richard Lacount. Lacount comes in at number 46 on this list. As I said before, Lacount is also one of those guys I think that really needs to take a big step forward with his career for Georgia to win the national championship. And once again, what Lassen writes at Athlon about Lacount, I also think is pretty interesting. He says that Lacount should become the leader for Georgia's, it should say secondary on the screen, on a defense that should rank as one of the best in college football. My apologies for omitting the word there. But the idea that Lacount is kind of valuable top 50 type player because of his leadership. We understand that. We've praised Lacount for that before. And we around here do truly think that his leadership should be valuable for Georgia this upcoming season. However, let me take this a step further, though, and say that Lacount's got to be more than just a leader for UGA. And the good news is last year, he was more than that. He was an impactful player on the field. The stats speak for themselves. Lacount led Georgia with 4 interceptions a year ago. He was the only player that had more than one on the season, and he had 4 of those. He also led Georgia in forced fumbles last year. He had 2. For Georgia to win a national championship in 2020, this guy Lacount, who kind of comes back to Georgia for senior season with All-American type projections for his final year at Georgia, it's got to be more than the leadership. It's got to be more of what he showed flashes of last year, being a real ball hawk that changes games with turnovers, that gets a chance to throw on those spike shoulder pads and celebrate over on the bench after the big play is made. That's what you need more of from Richard Lacount, and if he continues to do that, then he will have a chance to take that next step with his development, that next step in his career, and give you a chance to win the national championship if you're UGA. So if you're following along so far, we're talking about the players that have to step up for Georgia to win the national championship this season, and by the way, making good on my prediction of beating Alabama twice in 2020. Let me give you now a few more here. George Pickens just missed out on making Athlon's list of the top 50 players in college football, but by the end of the season, I think most of us expect that he will be a top 50 level player, one of the most dynamic, impactful wide receivers, if in the SEC for sure, if not all of college football. However, for me, I think there is a question still for Pickens to answer. And it's not so much of the off-field kind of stuff that kind of got brought up around the time of the Georgia Tech game or the SEC championship or anything like that. It's really something that Pickens said after the SEC championship, one of the reasons he credited for his success here this season. Apparently, now he doesn't mention Fromm by name, but he's sitting next to Fromm and talking about Fromm. Apparently, according to Pickens, Jake Fromm had a pretty big impact on his freshman season based on how those two worked together at practice. Here's what Pickens said about that going back to December.
It's really just him. He pushed me every day. Coach Mark pushed me every day to be the player I am today. So just me connected with him at practice all the time is really just the best thing.
So once again, the him there is Jake Fromm, the quarterback that Pickens had a chance to work with last year. By now you know Jake Fromm's not going to be at Georgia anymore. It's a new quarterback, Jamie Newman. So when you think about the idea that Pickens comes in and breaks out, takes the next step, steps up in a big way, allowing Georgia to potentially win the national championship, one of the questions that needs to be answered in order for that to happen is how quickly can the rapport be built and established with the newcomer at quarterback for Georgia, Jamie Newman, and George Pickens now in his second year. Because Pickens has been in the program, you'd love to think that he makes the transition easier for Newman, but it sounds like in Pickens' own words, last year Fromm made the transition easy for Pickens. But these two guys establishing that chemistry together pretty quick is going to be a really important thing. However, Pickens and Newman are not the only big names on offense where this is true. I think you put a big spotlight on Zamir White as well. Now, this is, possibly because Georgia kind of has that reputation of being RBU, running back university, a program that's prodigious when it comes to success, the running back position. But this is also possibly true because for this year, for the first time in a long time, I think UGA fans can kind of justifiably say, we're not quite sure what our favorite team has at the running back spot right now. DeAndre Swift is gone, and in terms of proven commodities behind him, this is probably fewer of those than maybe Georgia's used to having, probably since any time prior to when Todd Gurley showed up at the University of Georgia. However, Zamir White's going to get first crack to be the lead dog for this pack, and given the way that he's worked to rehab himself after a couple of serious knee injuries the last couple of years, working to now take the next step with his development, I think that may be a pretty safe bet. In fact, here's what Zamir said about that after the SEC championship game.
I just worked and just did what I did to get back because all I know is hard work and just grinding, man. So yes, sir. So that's what I do.
How much did it help the fans and the support you got from the Georgia fans? Was that a big part of pushing?
Georgia fans are great fans, man. They're huge, man, and they supported me through it all, the downfall and all that. So I love Georgia fans, man. They're the best.
He loves Georgia fans, and all he knows is hard work and grinding. You couldn't pick better words for a Georgia player to use, and if you're looking for someone to break out this year, statements like that are a pretty good hint that it might happen. But, as I said before, I need to be fair and balanced about this because I have predicted Georgia to beat Alabama twice. And as I talk about guys who need to break out for Georgia and point out a couple of those guys show up on the preseason top 50 list for Athlon Sports, it is fair to say in one area the Crimson Tide kind of has the dogs beat, at least for the moment. On that same Athlon list, Bama currently has 5 of the top 20 and 6 of the top 30. So when you think about top-end talent, the national media seems to think Alabama has it. Georgia's going to need to prove that. And I just gave you 4 of the names who I think that can prove that they belong in that top-end conversation. There's one more name I want to get to, and I'm going to do that here coming up. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. It's good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or on the radio at noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really appreciate you being with us, and we are certainly thankful for our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. We have had, in Metro Atlanta area where I live, just tons and tons of rain. It's been crazy. And obviously when the rain comes like this, it presents a big problem. In some cases, you notice rain slipping into your basement in a way that it's not supposed to. Some of you are reminded of a foundation issue you might be dealing with when it comes to things like this time of year. Well, Engineered Solutions of Georgia is the one you want to trust if you're dealing with anything like this. Cracked foundation, wet basement, damp cross space, any of that. Engineered Solutions of Georgia, a solutions-oriented company, can give you a fix. They're also a proud partner of the Georgia Bulldogs, so they're fun to do business with. They offer a fully transferable triple protection warranty on materials, installation, and design. And maybe the most important thing of all, because when it comes to a foundation issue, sometimes these things can be a challenging thing to deal with. Sometimes this can be serious work. Well, the good news is Engineered Solutions of Georgia has 2 full-time engineers on staff. They are the ones that we would trust here at DawgNation, and they're the ones that you ought to trust as well. Very easy to get in touch with also. Simply dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, and that'll get you in touch with my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, I'm going to get Connor Riley here coming up in just a minute. Before that, though, and I'm also going to do kind of one more thing on one more player who I think needs to break out for Georgia this upcoming year for the Dogs to have a real legitimate shot at winning a national championship. So we'll do all that here coming up in the next couple of minutes. Before that, as promised, I said this off the top of the show, that one of the things I'm really looking to do, always looking to do, is make DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, as interactive as I possibly can. Not just me talking, but you having a chance to sound off and share your opinions. It's why we bring guests on. It's why we play audio clips. We want other voices beyond mine to be heard. So with that in mind, I'm going to reintroduce something today that we've kind of done before in the past, and I always think this is fun, and I'm going to try to make it even bigger and better than we've done before. It's called the BAQ&A. It's simply a few questions on the basis of some of the topics we've either talked about on today's show or previous shows or whatever else. And in some cases, there's some context needed for this. And over the course of the program, I am going to give these to you. So if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, put your answers to these questions in the comment section. If you can't watch live, but you listen or view later on, simply reach out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. There's a comment section when I post the show to DawgNation.com. You can put your answers there. And I'm going to read a lot of these, either from the previous day or the current day, on the show each and every day to give you a chance to kind of have your voice heard here on the program that we do. So with that in mind, let me give you the 3 questions for today. It's our BA Q&A. Here are the 3 for today. The first one is this, and there's an explanation needed for this that I'll give you later in the show. Which UGA assistant is most likely to one day become a head coach? Let us know your thoughts on that. Also, yesterday I made my pick that Bama will win the SEC West this season. Who do you think wins the SEC West here for this upcoming season? And then finally, the third prediction, the third question, I made a bold prediction yesterday. I said that I think that Georgia beats Alabama twice this upcoming year. Have you already formulated a bold prediction coming up for 2020? If so, please give that to us either in the comment section, on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, when I post the show at DawgNation.com. We'll read a lot of these today and tomorrow. I've also going to put these in the forum. I'm going to be reading some of the forum responses later on. You can see that online at the forum, forum.DawgNation.com, for a whole lot more on that. Okay, before I bring on Connor Riley and talk to him, let me go around the doghouse here for a moment. And if you're on radio or video and you're just joining us, one of the things we started the show by talking about today was the 5 players that I think need to break out for Georgia to win the national championship. And I made the comparison to Alabama, which, according to Athlon Sports, has 6 of the top 30 players in the country for the preseason, 5 of the top 20. That if Georgia's going to really beat the Crimson Tide, if Georgia's going to really be where Alabama has been, where Clemson and LSU have been in recent seasons, you've got to have more top-end performances. You've got to have more players on your team who are viewed as great. And I gave you Jamie Newman as one of those guys, and I gave you George Pickens as one of those guys. I gave you Zamir White as one of those guys. I mentioned Richard Lacount as well. There's one more defensive name I want to get to here. And admittedly, when it comes to picking that next breakout guy on defense, it can be a little bit of a challenge because Azeez Ojulari would seem to have some of the credentials necessary to be that guy. Trayvon Walker would seem to have some of the credentials to be that guy. Nakobe Dean, with the way that he plays the game, reminds you a little bit of Roquan Smith, who obviously was that guy for Georgia just a couple of years ago. However, the name I'm going to focus on here for a moment may be the most important of all. I think that Georgia needs a huge year from Nolan Smith. It's now sophomore outside linebacker, and there are a couple of reasons that I think this is true for Nolan. And one of those, I think, is probably best described by one of my good friends, Chuck Smith. You see me do the Falcon Show with Chuck every Monday and Friday on the AJC Facebook and YouTube pages. You see us do that together there. But Chuck's also a great pass rushing coach. He's worked one-on-one with Nolan Smith before. And last year when I had Chuck on the show to talk about Nolan Smith, there was a phrase in particular that Chuck used then that I think is instructive for us now for why Georgia needs Nolan to be on that list of big-time step-up stars for the upcoming season. Here's what the former Falcon, Chuck Smith, has said in the past about Nolan Smith.
Well, I love me some Nolan Smith. He's part of the Passwords family. I've had a chance to train Nolan a couple years, man. Work with Nolan. He's unique. He has moves, and he can change the culture. One guy like that, he's going to be a great rusher. He's going to be but I love what Nolan brings. He's quick off the ball. He's confident. He knows how to work moves. But one thing he has a pass rusher's mentality, not just an athlete. Give me the pass rusher's mentality, then athlete second.
There are 2 phrases there that I think that Chuck uses that are really important. He talks about a pass rusher's mentality. He says that he's seen that from Nolan Smith, having worked with him one-on-one. Chuck also talks about Nolan potentially changing the culture here at Georgia. And listen, I think that Georgia has been very good defensively, but in terms of truly selling out for a pass rusher's mentality, maybe that necessarily hasn't been the case for Georgia. I mean, last year, Nolan was one of 6 Georgia players with 2.5 sacks. That's essentially tied for second on the team. Ojulari led the team. I think he had 5.5, but 6 guys had 2.5. That's not a lot of sacks for a program like Georgia that has so many elite athletes at the pass rusher position. That's a culture that can change and it can evolve. And I think Nolan Smith, maybe even partially because he was the former number 1 recruit, the class of 2019, I think has a chance to change all that. But it's not just recruiting credentials for Nolan Smith on this. It's also the attitude, the work ethic that he brings to the table. Let me give you one more piece of evidence of that about why I think Nolan, maybe more so than the other names you could mention defensively right now, is the best candidate to break out and maybe the most important name to step up in addition to the other ones we've mentioned on the Georgia defense. As Warren Brinson described, who Brinson played with Nolan at IMG Academy, DJ Shockley in the official video put out by UGA the other day said, hey, Warren, Did your high school teammate and your buddy Nolan Smith tell you anything about having to come to Georgia, what to expect once you got here? And what Brinson said that Nolan told him, I think, is a great reminder of the attitude and work ethic that Nolan Smith is employing right now, and more evidence of why he may be one of the most appropriate predictions of all to break out this upcoming season. Here's Warren Brinson on Nolan Smith.
You played with Nolan. Has he given you any advice before you got here about what to expect when you got here?
He didn't even have to give me that. I mean, I know Nolan was not going to go to a place where you had to work hard. He was probably the hardest worker I played with. Like at IMG, I mean, he was crazy, sprinting everywhere, full speed, never stopping, high motor, always going. But he just told me, like, I came here up during the summer one time. He told me, just be ready for it. It's different. Just be ready.
When you listen to the way that Warren Brinson describes the motor that runs for Nolan Smith and his desire to work hard, his desire to keep getting better, I do think that makes him a strong candidate to potentially break out this season and help upgrade the pass rush, change the culture, and making Georgia a little bit more of a pass rush dominant program. I think that's all good news and good things to think about. And if those 5 that I just mentioned really can't take that step, then Georgia's going to have as much top-end talent as any program in the country and truly a legitimate, viable threat to win the national championship here this year. It's DawgNation Daily, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. I want to change the subject now, get ready to bring in our good buddy Connor Riley, and as I do so, one of the things we're going to talk to Connor about today, there was some news yesterday involving how G-Day is going to be televised. At first blush, this may seem like a bad thing, but over the course of our conversation, I'm going to try to explain why I think it's a good thing. We'll do that and a lot more with Connor Riley right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always enjoy a chance to talk to Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Always writing great stuff at DawgNation.com. Fresh off a trip to the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis last week, Connor made a special appearance on our show on Friday to talk more about his time there in Indy. If you missed Friday's show, make sure you go back and check that out in our archives, either podcast, video, or whatever else. You can find out more about that. And Connor, there's a lot I want to talk to you about today, but let me begin with something kind of off the radar. As we were ending the show yesterday, it was announced that the G-Day game on April the 18th is going to be televised a little bit differently this year. It's going to be available on the internet, SEC Network Plus, but in terms of regular television like we've come to expect for this game, it's only going to be available in kind of a whip-around format along with a couple of the other spring games. I think Alabama is one. What's the other one that's involved there?
Florida.
All right, so Alabama, oh boy, you're talking about Georgia having to share a TV window with Florida. How disgusting is that? But I have a lot of crackpot theories in life. Would you mind if I share with you a crackpot theory of why I think the new way of covering this might actually work out a little better for Georgia fans? Then I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
It's your show, Sal.
All right, so let me do this. So over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more gimmicks kind of introduced into TV broadcasts because ultimately, while G-Day and spring games like that are really interesting for the fans of that particular team, to the country at large, they're not necessarily all that interesting. Case in point, you and I are huge college football fans. I don't know that you've watched anybody else's spring game other than Georgia's last season, and I don't know that I spent a lot of time watching anything other than UGA either. So they're always trying to find these gimmicks to make these games better. I think, wasn't it last year that they had like the media people doing like officiating and stuff like that? And ultimately, I was in Athens for the game, but I heard a lot of people who watched the game on television who said at a certain point in time, they were talking way more about the pretend officials and going down there to let Marty Smith and people like that, kind of put on the clown show, that they weren't necessarily talking enough about the Georgia players who were actually in the game, which is what UGA fans want. My assumption is if you're tuning into the SEC Network Plus, there's not going to be a lot of bells and whistles. There's not going to be a lot of gimmick fake officials or anything like that, people in the booth that shouldn't be there or anything along those lines. You may get a little bit more of a, normal football presentation. So for the average Georgia fan who's not going to Athens, you may have to work a little harder to find the game on your screen, but once you get there, I think it's actually going to be a little bit more appealing product than the kind of sort of condition for the masses TV program they put out the last couple of years.
One, I understand why people would be worried about how do I find this game, where do I get it. If Brandon Adams can find SEC Network Plus, then I have full faith that you can find SEC Network Plus.
Yeah, so I watch the Georgia baseball games on SEC Network Plus all the time. I have successfully found it. But does this make me a boomer, Connor? And by the way, I'm decades shy of being a boomer. I would still rather watch the game on television. I don't know what this is. Like, to me, it's always a little less fun when I have to, like, log into a computer to watch the game. Same video presentation, same announcers, for the most part, same graphics. But is this okay boomer of me to say that I still just rather watch the game on television?
No, it's easier. As a card-carrying millennial, I have to find and juggle streams from time to time, and it can be very frustrating at times when a 2nd and 7 play is happening and your feed just cuts out. So I definitely understand why you'd want to see this game on TV, but the reality is, spring football and spring scrimmages just aren't, to a wider audience, all that important. And personally, my own personal feelings on this, I'd be fine if they did away with spring games. I understand the practices and the importance of those, but I just think the whole thing is just so overblown, and we try to make big stories of it. And the reality is that spring game itself doesn't often mean a whole lot to me. So I'd be okay if they just didn't televise it at all.
Well, I am pro-spring game. I'm pro-spring everything. Even, like I said, if eventually I kind of tune out on the other team's spring games, I still sort of like the fact they exist. But one, I will admit, argument against some of this kind of stuff is, you wrote this morning at DawgNation.com about the need for the Georgia defensive line to take that next step. And you don't really learn a lot about that from watching G-Day, right? I mean, there's certain position groups who, for the most part, just aren't involved. And, outside linebackers, defensive linemen, front seven guys who are supposed to be game wreckers when you're playing a different color uniform, when you're playing your own guys, you don't want them necessarily doing that. So I guess that is like the one argument against spring is the fact that if you tune in for G-Day or if you show up to Athens for G-Day, there are certain players that you go knowing you're not going to see much from because the sort of de facto rules of these things just kind of prohibit their involvement.
Yeah, I can tell you how G-Day is going to play out right now. Some wide receiver that we don't know much about or isn't essentially George Pickens is going to have a big day. One linebacker is going to rack up a ton of tackles, and some quarterback not named Jamie Newman is going to end up having a better statistical passing day than Newman himself. And that's just sort of the way these spring games are set up. And the reality is, I'd love to eventually one day see potential spring scrimmages, I just said, so I'm trying to stop that. But Georgia plays, I don't know, Middle Tennessee State, or Clemson goes and plays, a lower tier North Carolina team. Things like that to where you can actually see some different competitions out there. That'd be more interesting to me than an inter-squad scrimmage.
All of those predictions for G-Day storylines that you just mentioned, I can't wait to overreact to all of them. Let me change the subject here for a moment. You also wrote at DawgNation.com about an ESPN piece, but the biggest obstacle to Georgia for the college football playoff, and Heather Dinich was the writer. She mentioned Florida as opposed to Alabama, and honestly, I understand her reasoning for this. Technically, Georgia could lose to Alabama and still make the college football playoff, whereas losing to Florida and making the playoff seems a little harder to imagine and, frankly, a lot more difficult to stomach. But nonetheless, here's my question for you, and I mean this legitimately and honestly. As I said before, I'm trying to be fair and balanced when I possibly can be. So I keep reading what Dinich wrote that, hey, Florida may justifiably be the favorite in the SEC East over Georgia. Connor, talk to me like I'm 6 years old for a second. What are the arguments in favor of Florida over Georgia right now?
Kyle Trask. It's literally the only reason. If Florida did not have a returning quarterback, if they faced the sort of same uncertainty that Georgia does, there would not be this talk of verifying them as a preseason favorite over Georgia. I think the way college football media works and the way just the national media at large works, they assume starting quarterback coming back, you're going to have a way better shot at winning the next year. And because Florida has a more solid option at quarterback than Georgia does right now, as much as you can like Jamie Newman, that's the reason some people are going to try and come off as smart. They're trying to make themselves seem smarter than they are and say, hey, Florida's actually the team to watch out for here. And it is only because Kyle Trask is a returning starter.
Yeah, I said this the other day when you weren't here. To me, Dan Mullen in Florida, Mullen really in particular, now he's at Florida, so the Gators get some of this. We just kind of came off like the Academy Award season. Mullen is the classic example of critically acclaimed, not the box office smash hit, not the movie that everybody loves, but the movie that critics kind of like. Mullen has kind of always been the coach that critics kind of like. And Heather Dinich, I think, isn't an example of this right now. And honestly, I'm not sensitive to this, right? I mean, I'm not, I'm a big boy. I can take that even if I don't think Mullen's very good. I don't think Florida's very good. It doesn't offend me to hear other people saying that. And yet I do sometimes strain to kind of try to find that evidence of that. Because, once again, to go back to the Mullen thing for a moment, we've seen him lose to Kirby Smart now, 3 years in a row?
Yep.
Twice at Florida, going back to Mississippi State. We treat Kirby Smart as if he's the can't win the big win guy because he's lost to Nick Saban twice, whereas, Mullen, seems to get the fact conveniently ignored that he hasn't beaten the guy head-to-head really ever when it comes to Kirby Smart, even going back to his time when Smart was the defensive coordinator at Alabama. There seems to be a weird, is it incongruity? Is that a word I can use? Incongruity to all of this in terms of Kirby kind of gets hammered for who he hasn't beaten, and yet Mullen kind of conveniently, I don't think it's intentional, but maybe accidental, just kind of gets a free pass in terms of he hasn't proven it head-to-head against Kirby Smart yet at all.
Right. And I would just add in as well, do you know how many times Dan Mullen beat Nick Saban in Alabama in the, I believe, 8 or 9 years that he was at Mississippi State?
I'm assuming it's 0.
It is
right?
0.
Yeah.
He never beat Nick Saban there, and I understand the whole.
Probably has one win as an offensive coordinator, I would say, going back to the 08 SEC title game. But
sure.
Yeah.
I'll allow that to be counted, though. I think Urban Meyer has had a lot more success against Saban than that so much of Mullen.
Right. That's very fair.
I think with Florida, you make a good point on the critically acclaimed stuff, but it's a more like a subgenre of that even. It's not like, your Marriage Stories or your Jojo Rabbits. It's like the Phantom Thread, the stuff that only people who claim themselves to be real cinephiles love. That's like the people who claim that Mullen is this superior coach that is able to do more with less. But in reality, and you say this all the time, Florida's not a school you do that at. Florida's a school where you do the most with more.
The one thing I will give him some credit for is that I expected a little bit of an implosion from Florida after the Georgia, we would call it a Georgia win, they would call it a loss to Georgia last season. I expected them to kind of maybe circle the wagons and kind of give up because they had nothing else to play for. Mullen has been good at dominating bad teams thus far at Florida for the most part, so I'll at least give credit for that. But I haven't really seen a lot of evidence yet that they're ready to go out there and beat a Georgia head-to-head. And I say that as someone who doesn't want that to happen. I take comfort in what I've seen from the last couple of head-to-head matchups between Georgia and Florida.
If you look at Mullen in the last 2 years at Florida, how many times have they beaten a team that is better than they are?
Yeah.
Kentucky, I think, was a better team than Florida was in 2018.
Yeah.
Florida lost that game. Conversely, I think Florida was probably a little bit better than LSU was that year, but you could pick nits there. But this past year, LSU clearly better than Florida. Florida lost that game. Georgia, I think, better than Florida. Florida lost that game. Mullen has shown he has no problem of beating those inferior teams, but it's when his team has to punch up a weight class or take on a team of similar size and stature, his team always just sort of seems to find a way to lose.
All right, so yesterday I talked myself into something I am quite proud of. I believe that Georgia is going to have a very enjoyable 2020. I believe the Dogs beat Alabama twice this year. I think the Crimson Tide will win the SEC West. I think Georgia beats them in September, turns around and beats them in December. And frankly, given the way that Alabama fans have a tendency to turn on their own, I don't think Nick Saban can survive losing twice to the same team in the same year. How much fun is this upcoming year going to be if it plays out that way for UGA fans?
It'll be a ton of fun, but I don't think that's how it's going to play out. And honestly, I don't know if that's how you necessarily want it to play out, because if I can paint you a scenario here, let's say Georgia does go in and win in Tuscaloosa on September 19th. We both probably agree right now Mac Jones is the starter for that game, correct?
I would say, yeah, I'd be surprised if he wasn't.
If Mac Jones loses that game and he does not play well, I bet a significant sum of money that Bryce Young will be the starter there. And I think his upward mobility or trajectory is greater than that of Mac Jones. And when Georgia does play Alabama a second time, which I do think is going to happen, I'd much rather be rooting for Georgia to be playing Mac Jones than I would Bryce Young.
We should remind people that Bryce Young was a 5-star signee for the class of 2020. I certainly understand that, and I get the idea that the longer you can kind of hold off, it's to me very similar to the Tua Tagovailoa Jalen Hurts thing from a couple years ago. The longer you can get Saban to hold off on that, I think the better it is for the teams that are playing them, because I do think that Young is eventually going to be a better quarterback than Mac Jones is, who I think is just kind of okay, probably somewhere in the middle of SEC starters if he were to be one. Ultimately, though, if I'm going to pick Georgia to do this, I've got to factor Bryce Young into this, because the truth is that Saban didn't recruit him to sit him. I think that Saban knows that he's in the winter of his career one way or another. I think you're seeing him take more risks than he's taken in the past, be more aggressive in some cases that he's been in the past. And I think that he knows that Bryce Young is the last great quarterback, or at least great quarterback prospect, I should say, the last great prospect he's ever going to get a chance to coach. And so I don't think Saban's going to hesitate to use him. So I have to factor in the Bryce Young factor in making this prediction for Georgia, because my assumption is not only will he be the one that starts against Georgia in December, but while you mentioned Mac Jones starting against Georgia, obviously Young I think would expect to be starting in December. You mentioned Mac Jones starting in September. That's probably true, but I would expect that Georgia sees a lot of the freshmen in September as well.
I do expect them to play Young. I think sort of what they did in Jalen Hurts' first year, where that first couple of games they're rotating in between quarterbacks. I do see that, but I also see Alabama winning that September 19th game, largely because I just don't know yet what we're going to see with that offense. And Alabama just has Georgia's number, and until I see something different, and I don't know if we're going to see that before that September 19th game, I just don't know if I can believe that Georgia is going to find a way to go into Bryant-Denny Stadium, a place they have not gone into and won. They just haven't played there in recent history. They haven't played in that environment. They did win the last time they were there, but that was over a decade ago.
2007, yeah.
Until I see something from this Georgia offense, and we could see it in the Virginia game, I'm not quite ready to believe in them at that point yet.
It's not an unreasonable prediction. It's really not, because Alabama's obviously going to be favored in the game. I'm obviously taking a little bit of a hopeful, twist to all of this, saying that Georgia wins the game. I don't think it's unreasonable to pick Georgia to win the game either. Here's what I will say about it, Connor. At first blush, it almost looks like a relatively meaningless regular season game, because both teams could overcome the loss and still make the college football playoff. We've seen Alabama, make the playoff after a loss before. However, for different reasons, I think both teams really need the game. You just said that you think that Alabama has Georgia's number right now. Boy, it'd be great to kind of vanquish some of that talk moving into the month of October for UGA and for Alabama, who last year lost twice to SEC West foes. Can you imagine the notion of now playing the rest of the season, knowing you really have no margin for error whatsoever, given the fact that you have a current losing streak to two of the teams you'll be playing in your division? So it's one of those things of, we're used to seeing teams overcome September losses and then kind of bouncing back from that. But for different reasons, both these schools, Georgia and Alabama, have a pretty big reason to circle that game.
Yeah, it's a big game for both sides. And Alabama lost its last SEC game to Auburn, so they'd theoretically be having a 2-game SEC losing streak. And I think for Saban, Alabama's able to sort of do and keep churning that machine, because Nick Saban is still ahead of Kirby Smart. But let Kirby Smart beat Nick Saban once and see how that is sort of shaken and how the footing underneath Saban is, because I think Alabama fans at this point now might be getting ready to turn on him, just given his age, given, at some point his nature, the way he talks to people, the way he presents himself to the media, that does wear on people. And I think at some point, you might just want a fresh face.
Completely. I mean, I think that Saban is aware of that fact. I think it's one of the reasons why he originally flirted with Texas a few years ago. I think he wants to remind them that he could have gone other places, and I think he's very aware of how toxic the environment around the Alabama program can be when it's not in the college football playoff. All right, last thing before we let you go, we are reintroducing the BA Q&A today, and so I want to get some quick responses from you on these 3 questions, and for the most part, I'll let you be the one to have the floor here. So I'm asking the current Georgia assistant most likely to become a head coach, and I'm mentioning that because Scott Cochran's on the staff now, and Cochran has said before he wants to be a head coach. So, Connor, given the 10 guys on staff, who's the most likely to be an FBS college football coach again first?
Dan Lanning.
It's very interesting. I'm already seeing a lot of our forum responses, forum.dawgnation.com. Lanning's the name that comes up there pretty quick. I don't know that he'd be first for me, but he would certainly be on my list. Tell me your reasoning.
I think Dan Lanning is going to be hired as a head coach this fall, after the season.
Are we talking group of 5 school? Is that kind of what you're thinking for him?
I think potentially. I really thought Memphis might make a run at him.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe an ACC school sees what he is doing. I think Lanning had an exceptional year last year. I thought he made some nice tweaks to Kirby Smart's defense, and I wonder if maybe this year Smart gives him a little bit more control and we start to see Lanning have a greater influence on this defense. And the guy's just a stud recruiter. He's been able to go all over the country and convince players to go, come play at Georgia. And he's a young coach. I think that's going to be attractive to a lot of programs. And, we've seen, Sam Pittman get hired last year. I think you're going to start seeing teams, especially as Georgia has more sustained success, people are going to start wanting to take from that Kirby Smart tree. And Lanning is certainly the first real branch to come off of that, just given, I keep saying, Lanning was at Memphis, as an outside linebackers coach before Kirby Smart brought him to Georgia, and Lanning has gotten better and had a bigger impact on Georgia each and every year.
I have picked the SEC West winner correctly 3 years in a row. I don't like to brag, but that is a fact. Other people have pointed this out.
Yeah.
Do you have a pick for the SEC West this upcoming season?
I'll be chalky and take Alabama.
All right. Yeah, I think this for me comes down to hard to make a strong case for LSU. They've just lost a lot. They still have a lot, but they've lost a lot. I think Auburn on defense I've got some questions about. I've told you before, I like Texas A&M. I could see A&M going 11-1, but ultimately being better than Alabama, that may be too much too soon for Jimbo's Aggies.
Yeah, winning at Alabama next year, which is what Texas A&M has to do, I think that's a tough ask for them. I trust in Saban, trust in the infrastructure there. I know at the end of the year they're going to be, as long as there aren't catastrophic injuries, they're going to be 10-2 or 11-1, and they're going to be right there in it.
Then finally there is this. I've given my bold prediction, at least the first of my bold predictions for this year. I got Georgia beating Bama twice. Do you have a bold prediction for the upcoming season? And it can be on any topic.
I do. Mark your calendars right now. Circle the date. Cancel any plans you have. January 1st, we will be broadcasting from Pasadena, California. I believe Georgia will make the college football playoff. I believe they will play in the Rose Bowl. I do not, however, believe that they will be the number one seed.
Okay.
Meaning, I think Clemson is going to get the number one seed. They're going to go play in the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. Thank God. That way we don't have to go back there for a third year. And I think that means we're going to see Georgia, and I think we're going to see Ohio State in the Rose Bowl out there.
Can you imagine that? There will be a gazillion people there.
Oh my
Buckeyes
God, yeah.
fans love to go to Pasadena. They've made that trip 1,000 times. That's a tradition for Ohio State fans. Georgia fans, I think, want to make this a tradition after they had so much fun in 2017. That will be unbelievable. Connor, that truly does qualify as a bold prediction. We appreciate that, and thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Great bold prediction from Connor, and that's what makes it fun. Look, this time of year, we like this kind of stuff. We love hot takes. We love all that kind of stuff. And that was a good one from our buddy Connor Riley. Let's transition now to our SEC Through as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I've told you before, I love Perfect Day Coco Cay. It's that private island oasis right there in the Bahamas. You can only get there via a Royal Caribbean cruise, so our friends at Royal Caribbean are definitely the ones to know when it comes to this. And I told you yesterday, you get the thrill side, all the fun stuff you can do. Listen, I'm a little bit more of a kind of kick back and relax guy when I'm on vacation, so it's the chill side of Perfect Day Coco Cay that's good for me. Whether it be Up and Away, which is a helium-filled balloon that goes 450 feet in the air, a great way to get a panoramic, beautiful view of the Bahamas. Oasis Lagoon, freshwater pool. It's largest in the Bahamas, I think. Just unbelievable. Chill Island, which is kind of a good place to hang out. Also, here's what's coming in here now. Cocoa Beach Club is about to open up. Floating cabanas. What a great way to spend some time and enjoy that there. Just unbelievable. Really, really fun stuff to be able to do that. By the way, if you want to be a part of this, contact your travel advisor or reach out to my friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. You can give them a call at 800-326-4971. That's 800-326-4971. Let them know you heard about them here on DawgNation Daily. All right, as we're cruising on the SEC, a couple stories to get to. So Clavon Chason, who's one of the names to know for the upcoming NFL draft, was telling a really funny story about Ed Orgeron. I think Pro Football Focus is the one that had this via an interview clip. So he's talking about recruiting and how Orgeron's trying to do the final in-home visit with him to seal the deal for his recruitment. And Chason's like, I'm not going to be there. I'm going to go take another visit somewhere else. And I forget where Chason was visiting. Obviously, that would have made the story better. But the point is, he was only going to be in his home for like a couple of hours, and then he was back on the road again to go take another official visit. So here's what Orgeron does. According to Chason, and I'll put a link to this maybe when I post the show later on, Orgeron shows up at his house at 4 a.m. He's knocking on the door, and he's all smiles and jumping in there to do an in-home visit with Clavon Chason like 4 a.m. Now, to me, this is really instructive. A lot of y'all know I've grown to like Ed Orgeron. I like the way he goes about his business. And to me, this is a perfect example of that. There are plenty of coaches bold enough to show up at somebody's house at 4 a.m. Jim Harbaugh, for goodness sake, slept over at somebody's house. To me, it's not that interesting that Orgeron showed up in the middle of the night. What seems interesting to me is, at least based on the way that Chason tells the story, is that he was warmly received at 4 a.m. Now, this is a really interesting category to put yourself in life. How many people, if they knocked on your door at 4 a.m., would you be glad to see them? And how many people's door could you knock on at 4 a.m. in the middle of just the dead of night sleeping, and when they kind of wiped that sleep out of their eyes and walked over the door and saw you standing there, how many people would be glad to see you? I know I kind of have a tendency to kind of pick on Nick Saban a good bit, but if Nick Saban's knocking on your door at 4 a.m., I don't know how many hugs and kisses are greeting him when that door comes open. He's just not the warmest guy in the middle of the day, much less the middle of the night. Same thing for Dan Mullen. You think Dan Mullen's going to get welcomed and received well at 4 a.m. if he's knocking on somebody's door? Apparently Ed Orgeron did, and that's one of the reasons why I think that Orgeron is a force to be reckoned with in the SEC. By the way, Kirby Smart, I think he's probably plenty fine knocking a lot of doors at 4 a.m. He just kind of develops those relationships. That may be the ultimate barometer for good recruiting and not. If it's the middle of the night and you show up, are they glad to see you? If so, you may be on your way to a recruiting win. Speaking of Nick Saban, Alabama, I thought this was very interesting. Paul Feinbaum, you know him. He goes on WJOX in Birmingham. Now, Saturday Down South had the kind of transcript of all of this. The subject comes up of what, and we talked about this in yesterday's show, remember? Terrell Lewis, the Alabama outside linebacker, citing a lack of communication defensively from the top down. Coordinator Pete Golding sending in the play calls as one of the reasons why Alabama lost twice last year. And I said it's this shaky thing on defense right now, the kind of loss of defensive coordinator prestige in that program since Kirby Smart left after the 2015 season. One of the reasons why I think that Alabama is vulnerable for Georgia to beat them twice this upcoming year. Well, apparently on the heels of this, Paul Feinbaum goes on WJOX, and he hammers Golding, the defensive coordinator, saying that he's the worst DC that Saban has had at Alabama, and it's not really debatable. Feinbaum says Kevin Steele, Kirby Smart, Jeremy Pruitt. I don't even have to consider Tosh LaPoy because he wasn't invited to come back. But that he thinks that Golding is the worst defensive coordinator that Saban's ever brought back for an upcoming year. So that he says that I think that Saban's insistent on not making a change. He went against his better judgment and brought him back, essentially highlighting a lot of things that we've highlighted, that Alabama fans are kind of ready for Charlie Strong to take that defense over. They don't trust Pete Golding. It's this inability to find a defensive coordinator and maintain him. As I said before, this is one of the things that I think Georgia has going for it as it tries to knock off Alabama this upcoming year. One more thing, and I'll do this quick. South Carolina continues its spring practice. A couple interesting notes coming out of this. It certainly seems like the quarterback Ryan Helensky is looking to take the next step with his development. I think him working with Mike Bobo this year is going to be a really interesting thing to see, and a very interesting weapon, Daquan Jordan, the former quarterback, transitioning to wide receiver. It seems like he's finding a home there in that spot there as well. I love it when spring practice begins. South Carolina is the first to kick this off around the SEC, and I think that's a really good thing there as we cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. I'm going to get a couple of your comments coming up here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, on our BA Q&A for today. But before that, let me kind of set this up a little bit more. I mentioned before Scott Cochran coming to Georgia because he wants to be a head coach one day. And he's been welcomed into UGA the way we kind of do in modern times now, with a pretty cool video. Now, I can't play the sound on this because it's got commercial music, and I don't want to get in trouble with the overlords on the various video platforms that we broadcast on. But I will put a link to the tweet when I post the show later on. Pretty cool thing from Georgia here with some nice footage of Cochran apparently already getting some work in there at UGA. Also we'll go ahead and show some people the video here. Also some nice quotes from some former Bama players crediting Cochran for why they've had success. It's very well done, very classy. It's kind of short, but there's a lot of energy to it. In the Scott Cochran era, what a lot of folks imagine that it could be, this video, I think, gives you a real taste of that. Georgia is good at doing these type of things, and typically they were very good with this one as well. So if you haven't seen it, I'll make sure I put a link to that when we post the show a little bit later on at the world-famous DawgNation.com. So with that in mind, Cochran wants to be a head coach. I've asked you, who do you think the current UGA assistant is most likely to become a head coach? I also ask you, who do you think will win the SEC West, and then what your bold prediction is for the upcoming season. If you're not watching us live and you can't put these in the comment section, hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. There's a comment section when I post the show at DawgNation.com, or you can go to the forum at forum.DawgNation.com and share some of your thoughts on this as well. With that in mind, let me go to the forum here for a couple of these comments because I thought these were really pretty good on this subject here today. Let me start with South Florida Dog here on the forum, forum.DawgNation.com, who, much like Connor Riley, says that he thinks that Dan Lanning, he says he thinks this probably will also be his last year at UGA, and he says that Monken is another obvious choice. I think those are both, good, obvious choices. I guess I also still very much believe in the likelihood and the possibility that one day Dale McGee is going to be a head coach. Now, are you guys right in that Lanning may be in line ahead of him before becoming a head coach? That could quite possibly be. But I definitely still see Dale McGee, the Georgia running backs coach, as future head coach material on that. He also picks Alabama to win the SEC West. And listen, here's a very bold prediction from South Florida Dog, and maybe he's got a little Gator hating in him too, which we don't mind around here. He says, despite a favorable schedule, Florida loses 3 conference games next season. The UGA bold prediction would be to average 46 points a game. So that's exactly the way the game is played right there. Very bold prediction. Having Florida losing 3 times this upcoming season in conference would be a real shocker. As I said before, I got to give them a little bit of credit because I do feel like under Mullen, they've gotten pretty good at winning the games against bad teams. They were a little shaky early in the season this past year, to be sure. But for the most part, took care of their business after the Georgia game when they really didn't have much to play for anymore after that. The one thing about Lanning one day being a head coach that I also think is pretty interesting too is, and I don't mean to kind of pick on James Coley here, but last season, Georgia for the most part, like one time a year before the year begins, makes the coordinators available. And when Lanning got a chance to speak as defensive coordinator compared to James Coley, who got a chance to speak as offensive coordinator, I was really impressed by how smooth Dan Lanning was speaking to reporters. And, as much as a lot of coaches don't like that, that is something they have to do a good bit. You can kind of tell if someone looks like head coach material by the way they talk to reporters. And Lanning was just like really smooth with it, had very easy answers to a lot of questions. I thought that by comparison, Coley just didn't seem quite as comfortable. He just didn't seem quite as comfortable in his own skin. And then you go out there and you see a performance by Lanning's unit compared to the performance by Coley's unit, and maybe that is kind of part of why that was. But I had kind of thought of Coley as a future head coach before last season. There's no doubt that at the end of the year, Lanning did seem to be more of a coaching star on the rise. Let me get a couple more of these comments here. Some really good stuff coming in. August Dog 69 on the Dog Nation forum says, another bold prediction. He has South Carolina finishing second in the SEC East. I think that's actually a pretty good prediction. Being better than Florida, maybe too much to ask. Being better than Tennessee, would not be surprised if that happens. We talked about the Gamecocks a moment ago. I think Mike Bobo gives them a chance to do something that they haven't done in the Will Muschamp era, which is play a much more competent brand of offense. So we'll do this every day. I'll do a lot of these on video after the regular show is done. I'll interact with you on Twitter about this, on the forum, and we'll just kind of have a fun time just making the show as interactive as possible, especially during this time of year when your hot takes and your opinions are really kind of what helps us pass the time before the start of spring practice and everything else. So we appreciate you doing that. Also here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG, let me send out some thoughts and prayers to our friends in Nashville. I know a lot of folks listen to us, watch us in that Nashville area. Downtown Nashville was really hit pretty hard by tornado-type activity last night. I'm still learning about a lot of the impact of all of this, but it seems like a pretty serious situation. So to those of us who are, to those of you there in Nashville area, certainly we hope you're doing well, and to everyone, we hope for a speedy recovery for that town. Also, something we love to be able to share around here, lousy stinking Gators, been a long time since they've beaten Georgia, in fact, 1,221 days. It's our Gator Hater Updater here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We appreciate all of you sharing everything with us today. We'll take a lot more of your comments right now, and of course, it's really good to be able to hear those from you here today. Let me get ready to go on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll do a lot of that kind of stuff. And as I do, I'll remind you that R.S. Andrews makes all of this possible. This time of day, this conversation like the BA Q&A allows, well, R.S. Andrews loves this kind of stuff. That's why they do the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And, of course, speaking of R.S. Andrews, if your water heater goes out, if you've got electrical issues, things like that, they can take care of you with that and put a smile back on your face. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles. They can deliver a smile for you, but you've got to find them online at rsandrews.com. All right, on Facebook to begin today, and then we will go to YouTube after that. Who knows? We'll maybe even hit a little Twitter stuff today before we're done here today, too. So on here, pretty funny. Let me see if I can get it pretty. Matt Rugavina says, he says our buddy Matt Jones from Kentucky Sports Radio has been telling everybody that Kentucky's got a shot to win the East. Well, good for him. Good for him. That's good to know. Stephen Burton, that's terrible news coming out of the situation in Nashville. I had no idea it was even that serious. Wow. So sad to hear about that. I think anytime you have a tornado like this that kind of hits in a metro area like that, just people are closer together, there's more potential for damage. You just hate to be able to hear that. Hate to hear that. Chad Williams says that he thinks that Dell McGee is the most likely to become a head coach next because we all know this is Kirby's defense. And it could be that Lanning has to live with a little bit of that. I do think he'll interview well. I think he kind of presents himself well, and that'll work in Lanning's favor. But I think that Dell McGee, because he's a good recruiter, because he's, just one of those guys that just seems to have a lot of gravitas to him, I think he's going to have a real chance there too. Philip Jordan Wells, his bold prediction is that vegan barbecue actually becomes popular. Boy, I hope not. I hope that's not the case. But Chad, it is a good prediction on Dell McGee. I would kind of agree with you on that, I think. Maybe not the very first, but certainly one of those guys who I do think is in line to do that eventually. I think McGee's one of those guys. Richard Pollard says, this is actually a pet peeve of mine, too. Richard says, thank you for calling it a water heater, not a hot water heater. Technically, hot water heater is redundant, so I do try to avoid that when possible. Now, there are a lot of errors I make all the time. Some of you are good enough to point those out, especially when I'm writing. But the hot water heater redundancy is one that I do try to avoid. Bob Garrison says he's missed the entire show because of work. Well, if that be the case, we're glad to have you here now. And we'll try to make good use of your time while you are here. We've got still a little bit of time left for some more comments, so we'll do some more of that. Chief Noel 44 says we can't lose Dell McGee. He's a good reason when you're running back university. Yeah, he's certainly been good. Certainly been good for the Dogs there in that regard, for sure. For sure. Yeah, people on YouTube also talking about the situation in Nashville. You just hate to see that. Terrible. Vincent Reed says, how do you think the virus will affect the football season? I actually think that's starting to be a really good question because by the time we get – now listen, what I'm about to say is not scientifically informed, but I have been on Twitter. The best I can tell, by the time the weather starts cooling off, it seems like the virus is going to have a better chance of going away. That somehow warming up is what I mean. So by the time we get to the football season, we may have less of this to worry about, but just because the weather will be warm by then. Somebody on Twitter said. So I'm not quite so sure that cold weather just kind of serves as a whatever for this, and that we may actually have to deal with it again once the cold weather season comes back around next year. Ultimately, here's my attitude about the coronavirus, and I'm glad you asked. I think it's probably smart to make little changes, daily small things. I don't know that I'm going to make any kind of big change with the way that I live my life. For instance, I'm not going to restrict any travel. I'm not going to, stop shaking someone's hand, I don't think. But there are like little things that I probably should be doing anyway. I'm kind of a hand-washing freak as it is, but washing my hands even more, it's probably not a bad thing. It takes 2 seconds, and why not, right? There's a lot of hand sanitizers around where we work. Why not just grab some every time you go by? Like, what does that cost? I mean, it costs a little bit of money, I guess, to the people who put it there. But in terms of overall impact on my quality of life, that doesn't impact me very much. Our buddy Connor Riley and I were actually talking about this the other day, that one of the things that I do that I'm going to try to stop doing, and you've got to understand something. I don't get sick at all. I've been doing this show since 2015. I've never had a sick day. I don't get headaches. I don't get colds. I don't get fevers. I don't get anything. I don't ever get sick. And I've been talking for years this has been the case. But that still means that there are little things I can still do to kind of put myself in sort of a better health situation. When I go down an escalator, for instance, I have a tendency to like rub my hand all over that little black stripe thing that kind of rolls around. But there's just no reason to do that, right? Just put your hands in your pocket and stand there. It's just kind of gross to touch that stuff. So There are like little changes that I think I'm going to make and kind of already tried to make them. But in terms of big changes, like not going to Tuscaloosa or something like that, there's no way I would do that. There's no way I'd do that. I'm not going to. I don't think you can live your life in fear, first of all. Whether it's scientifically sound to do that or not, I'm not really the expert to say. By then, it's probably not going to be that big of a deal because this is, I think, more of a cold weather thing. But like little changes that kind of go on every day, for me, more so than the big change. That's kind of my thought on that. Johnny Lester also mentioning how this compares to like the regular flu, and I've certainly heard those numbers as well. I guess my only question is like I said before, I just don't know that much about this all the way around. Is this more contagious than the regular flu? I guess that'd be one of my big questions. I don't know. I'll tell you who does know, and this is not a plug. This is being serious. The AJC's had some really good coverage of this. So if you want to know like the real facts and like what's really going on here without kind of like the internet hype, the AJC's done a pretty good job of covering all of this. Scott Harris says, this is a bold prediction. A quarterback other than Newman will be getting 50% of the snaps by midseason. That's a very bold prediction, Scott. I will give you credit for a bold prediction on that. I personally would be rooting against that because I think that Newman's Georgia's best case scenario there. But that is a very, very big prediction. Dina Pruitt says, I jinxed myself. Dina, you can ask anybody who works with me. I say this all the time. Like, I know this sounds crazy. I really do believe that mindset prevents me from getting sick. I am very, very big on that. Robert Clark says, are we being too optimistic about UGA in 2020? This is a good question. New offensive coordinator, legit questions at literally every offensive position group. UGA has talent, but a lot to overcome. So, Robert, the honest truth is, of course, there's a chance we could be sugarcoating this. Of course, it's a possibility. Part of my reason in feeling pretty good about Jamie Newman is the fact that so many other SEC teams also have uncertainty at quarterback. For instance, Alabama, they may feel a little bit better because they have at least two names to depend on. You know, Bryce Young, the incoming freshman, Mac Jones, who's played a little bit before, but they're uncertain at quarterback. I mean, I said this before. Of the preseason top 50 players listed at Athlon, Jamie Newman's the only SEC quarterback on the list. Now, by the end of the season, that could change. Bo Nix may be better. Kyle Trask may be better. Miles Brennan may show up and prove that he's more than just a restaurateur's grandson. You may have a lot that kind of shows up here in the SEC by the time the season's done. But for now, most of the SEC teams have fairly legitimate questions at quarterback. So this is actually, for me, an easier year to think about transitioning with a guy like Newman. But there's obviously a chance that when you have still not that much returning production at wide receiver, and that matters, less of a known commodity at running back than we're used to seeing Georgia have, and that also matters. When you have kind of all of this going on, there is a chance that it just doesn't quite work out that way. And we all end up being a little bit disappointed. There's certainly a possibility that's true. But I think the one thing you can take some comfort in, it'll be more than just Georgia fans who say good things about UGA. On the list of teams that could win a national championship, Georgia's going to show up on everyone's list, and most of those will be produced far outside the boundaries of what we typically think of as DawgNation. Jazz Jackson says, are we going to have an official DawgNation invasion to Tuscaloosa? You better believe that, Jazz. That is on its way. On its way. Phil Rogers says, don't ever overlook Florida. They may be better than we think. Well, Phil, to that idea, it's impossible to overlook them because I've got constant reminders from the media about just how good they're supposed to be. So Florida will not be overlooked. Now, me saying that I still think Georgia's going to beat Florida is not overlooking them. I respect the game. I know how important it is for Georgia. I'm just confident Georgia's going to win. But there will be no overlooking them, certainly. And, you know, as long as Kirby Smart's the coach of Georgia, he's not going to let his team overlook them either. Gary and Christian Gulisano says that George Pickens will have more yards receiving than Zeus will have rushing. There is a way that could be a very good thing. There is a way that may not, but there's a way that could be a very good thing. Good bold predictions. I love this kind of stuff. We will probably do bold predictions more than one. Robert Barnes says dogs don't need more pressure. They need our full support. Yeah, I mean, I understand where Robert's coming from. I also think that, we've heard Kirby say pressure is a privilege. I think part of what that means is that at Georgia, it's just the cost of doing business. You will be expected to win. You will be expected to play well, and there's just no getting around that. I said this on Friday's show. One of the most important things to know about Jamie Newman, and based on what Smart said, you certainly think that he's in good shape in this regard. You have to know what you're getting into before you get into it. You're going to be very famous at UGA, and sometimes that's fun, sometimes it's not. More than anything, though, it's just a burden to live with. Everywhere you go, people knowing who you are. After a while, that gets kind of tiresome. I mean, some days you want to show up not having not shaved and just sneak into the supermarket and get yourself something to eat. But for Newman, that's going to be very hard to do this upcoming year, and for all the big high-profile Georgia players, that's kind of true. Couple more. Randy Hall says, how about predicting the starting offensive line? Let me wait a little bit on that. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to do that yet. I'm not quite sure. One of the things I wonder about, just given Jamari Salyer and his experience, I've said before, hey, I wouldn't mind seeing him moved inside. He started at right tackle in the bowl game. Maybe given his experience, maybe it becomes a thing where you actually think about him playing left tackle, for instance. There are a lot of moving parts of the offensive line. I'm not quite ready to do that yet, but we will definitely get there. We will definitely get there. Chad Williams, funny line from him. Gary King says, can't wait to see the new dogs for G-Day. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. All right, a couple more here. Over here on YouTube. Fanboy says, if Kiffin had Florida talent, the SEC would be in trouble. I do think that Kiffin's certainly a capable play caller. I've said before, though, I don't know that I think he's quite as good a head coach as some of y'all think he is. I think he's a smart offensive coordinator. I think he's a devious figure, which makes him a challenge to deal with. But as a impactful, league-changing head coach, I'm not quite sure I see that from him there. Scott Harris says, does the pit boss get Arkansas out of the cellar this year? I'm actually fairly high on Sam Pittman's future at Arkansas. I think that he could be something other than the last place team in the SEC West this year. I do. Green Soldier, good bold prediction. Kenny McIntosh is the clear number 2 back. For those that follow the storylines closely, that's actually a pretty bold prediction because I don't know that McIntosh would be the name that most people would mention as the number 2. Matt Rukavina. Yeah, we haven't seen as much Ninja the Noob and Pine Sol Lemon Scent. Now, Pine Sol comes in and out. Ninja, I haven't seen in a while. I haven't seen him in a while. Jermaine King says, I don't have SEC Network Plus, so I'm not looking forward to this G-Day TV coverage. But if you've got the SEC Network on your regular TV, you've got SEC Network Plus. You just have to sign in to get to it. So you probably do have it. And like I said before, this is not a joke. Like, I'm not techie at all. I mean, if I had my way, I'd read like books and magazines and newspapers. And I'd listen to vinyl. And I mean, like, I'm like the farthest end of tech, right? I mean, I'd be watching like one of those big 4:3 ratio, big screen TVs. Like, I'm the other end of technology for the most part. I'm just kind of an old soul, but I watch the Georgia baseball games all the time. So it's not hard to do. The easiest way to do it, not to give a plug to another website, but if you go to GeorgiaDogs.com, which is the official UGA site, they have the link to the game like right in there. That's generally speaking how I do the baseball stuff, because like I don't do like ESPN like Plus regular. Like I didn't watch the fight the other night or things like that. Like that's an example of old school like boxing fight. If I went to my cable and like pushed a button, I'm probably paying the $70 and watching like Wilder and Fury. New school, you got to sign up to ESPN Plus. I'm not fooling with that stuff. Plus, half y'all have a pirated stream anyway. Margaret Brooks says, I have YouTube TV. Can I get it? I'm assuming you can. I'm assuming YouTube TV probably works this way. I'm assuming you can. Jacob O'Neill says, answer Jennifer's question. We want to know. What is Jennifer's question? I don't see it. We got to get ready to go. All right. Dina Pruitt says you have to pay for Plus now, but SEC Network Plus is included with your like regular cable subscription. The ESPN Plus is a different deal. So yeah, that's that. All right, we got to get ready to go. Mike R says the Cochran video was amazing. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, it was really good. Georgia's good at some of that kind of stuff. The Cochran video they put together really, really well. You know, kind of nice, kind of in and out, 45 seconds. It's pretty good juice for all of that. And I'll put a link to that. So keep your comments coming. Go to the show page at DawgNation.com. You can drop them in there. Hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. I'll probably read some more on tomorrow's show, too. We're going to try to make it as interactive as we possibly can. Just kind of a fun thing to do. As I mentioned before, check out AJC.com. There's really good coverage of the coronavirus there and like what's real and what's not and kind of, you know, what really is going on with all of that. I do think it's kind of interesting, and it's obviously tough to kind of sift through this. There are a couple of cases in Georgia now. It's sort of hard to know what's real and what's not. Is it serious or not? I have a tendency to kind of downplay everything. That's not always the right tack to take. Anyway, you can read about that there. Also, plenty more on the NFL Scouting Combine from the perspective of the NFL. You can get that at AJC.com, too. So check that out for your Atlanta news now at AJC.com. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. Getting about that time to start thinking about getting those air conditioning systems ready to go. It's going to be warm before you know it. Check them out online at rsandrews.com. Have a great day. I will see you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.